a ghost story told to frighten children and caution empires. No homeworld, no ruins, no proof they ever existed, just whispers of a ruthless species that vanished into legend. But legends have a way of coming back. And when the skies tore open over Xanthara Prime, the galaxy learned the truth too late. Humanity hadn't died. They had waited. And now they had returned. Imagine a species so feared the universe erased them from history, a force so relentless, their return would shatter the balance of power itself. Today that force is back, and the galaxy is about to learn what happens when humanity is forgotten. Now let's begin. The stars had buried the truth of mankind beneath eons of silence. An ancient fable murmured between the long-lived. Legends whispered of a brutal breed from a veiled cradle, a people so fiercely unyielding even the lords of ruin could not erase them. Nothing of them endured. No cradle world, no shattered monuments, no echoes in the data fields. Only tales half remembered of a force that once scarred the void itself, then faded without trace. For ages, the Dominion Conclave ruled unshaken, its dominion cast across tens of thousands of skies. They called themselves the summit of evolution, untouchable fleets, flawless intellect, divine machines. But then the Varnak horde surged across the spiral arms, entire constellations swallowed in fire. And the Conclave's certainty began to bleed. No alliance could halt the tide. No sovereign dared resist, until the heavens above Varax's core were torn open. A fracture unlike anything charted erupted in the fabric of the cosmos, a gash of burning starlight. From that scar, warcraft emerged, ships no eye in the galaxy had ever conceived. They weren't like the crystalline sails of the Eliari, nor the writhing bioforms of the Zenthii broods. No, these were jagged, ominous, scarred titans born in realms unknown, armor blackened with the memory of ancient fire, their silhouette bristling with unspoken history. There were no flags, no banners, just silence and the eerie hum of forgotten engines. Then a signal broke through. One voice, thunderous, unflinching, speaking in a tongue dead a dozen eras. We are Terran, and we are back. The Varnak snarled at the defiance. To them, Terrans were bedtime phantoms, conjured to frighten children. They believed no force could rival their storm-forged empire. So they struck first. A horde cruiser opened fire, screaming pillars of molten plasma lashing toward the Terran lead ship. The strike should have torn through any barrier, should have turned the vessel into slag and dust. But it did not flinch. The blast struck like a hammer and woke the giant within. It answered, but not with grace, not with elegance, with fury. Kinetic obliteration, projectiles as massive as towers, ripped through the vacuum. Each shot a thunderclap of rage. The Varnak defenses shattered like brittle ice, shields collapsing in cascades of energy. The Terrans did not pause. Their warcraft moved as if choreographed by war itself, silent, merciless, exact. Not a missile wasted, not a maneuver flawed. They fought like survivors of 1,000 apocalypses, cold, relentless, absolute. The clash did not stretch into days. The once invincible Varnak were torn apart in a matter of hours. Their era ended in fire. Their titans of war now drifted as hollowed wreckage, flagships gutted, their iron-blooded lords silenced forever. And just as abruptly as their reemergence, the Terran spoke again. You erased us, buried our memory, whispered lies of our extinction. A breath, a pause. You were wrong. Across the constellations, entire dominions quaked. The myth had become flesh. Humanity was no longer a tale. It was a reckoning. And the galaxy would never return to what it once was. The shockwave from the slaughter above Zaltraxis Prime rippled across star charts. The Varnak horde, once the embodiment of unstoppable conquest, had been obliterated. What they expected to be a swift annexation became their extinction. Their extinction, not humanity's. In the gilded chambers of the conclave, the highborn watched in disbelief. They had clung to fables of Terrans as self-consuming savages, a civilization that burned through its own marrow in wars of madness. But now the truth stood in orbit, and its engines still smoldered. The Terran warships, prowling through the ruins, harvested the remains with ruthless precision. They came not with embassies, not with banners of truce. They came wearing no emblems, speaking no apologies. They came as sovereigns of ash. Archon Zyril of the Solari Ascendancy stood frozen within the council spire, her mind reeling as reports poured through holographic relays. 4 hours. That's all the Terrans needed. The Horde's battle fleet, once 1,000 vessels strong, erased from existence. Not even the apex powers of the Conclave had ever moved so swiftly. Zyril felt her pulse falter as she watched the crimson wall of Terran vessels tighten in Varnak space. No transmissions, no parley, just the stillness of something ancient watching. "Did we send an envoy?" croaked a broodlord of the Zerati hive, his mandibles twitching with unease. "We attempted," Zyril said, knuckles white as she gripped the obsidian table. "They offered no answer, no demands, no threats, just silence." "Silence is the predator's breath before the strike," hissed a scaled minister of the Valkyran fold. Zyril said nothing. She agreed. Silence was its own kind of war cry. Aboard the bridge of the HTC Vigil's end, Admiral Kale Wren stood at the edge of the war map, watching his fleet sweep the field one final time. Nothing salvageable remained. The Varnak flotilla was now drifting slag. His vessel's core intelligence, designation, Oracle, cast damage metrics across his display. Enemy obliteration, 98%. Terran losses, 0.4%. Wren exhaled, a knot coiling behind his ribs. "Too clean," he murmured. "Much too clean." They once crowned themselves the apex hunters of this spiral arm. Commander Kalethorn, standing beside Wren, let a crooked grin slip. "They thought we were echoes, Admiral. Ghost stories don't usually shoot first." But Wren didn't smile. "They still don't grasp what's before them," he muttered. "Not yet, but they will." A soft chime stirred the silence. The voice of Oracle, calm and synthetic, spoke, intercepted priority channels from the conclave. "They're watching. They're rattled." "Good," Wren said, his voice low. "Let them tremble. Let the memory return." His gaze turned cold, fixed on the abyss beyond, toward the sleeping giants of the conclave's core systems. "Bring the fleet to full readiness," he ordered. This is only the beginning. For the first time in the recorded millennia, the conclave sat paralyzed, not by reason, but by dread. The Terrans had returned like shadows torn from deep time, their steel phantoms carving through the Varnak fleet with surgical menace. But it wasn't the firepower that unnerved the highborn. It was the quiet. No warnings, no fanfare, only the deliberate, unyielding dismantling of anything in their path. On the ruling world of Celian, Archon Zyril summoned the highest emergency tribunal. The hall usually reserved for measured debate and polished deception, now vibrated with hushed panic. Every dominion sent a voice. Even the Zerati, long disdainful of the conclave's rule, took a seat. Above them, a towering hologram rotated through battlefield data. The Terrans had not stopped at the Varnak fleet. They were unmaking the entire dominion, one stronghold at a time, one planet at a time. The Varnak, once feared as galactic scourge, were now nothing more than hunted beasts. "This threat is without precedent," Zyril said, her silver-toned eyes scanning the chamber. "They are no longer myth. They are here, and they are moving forward." A general of the Valkyran fold tapped his talons against the obsidian table. "Have they spoken? Sent terms? Demands?" The air tensed, heavy with anticipation. An Eliari emissary, skin like midnight frost, finally replied. Nothing. No discourse. No answer. Only action. A Zerati matriarchist, mandibles clicking. Then they are no better than the Varnak. We should strike now, before they become untouchable. Zyral's jaw clenched. The Zerati always leaned on violence. But even they should have sensed the futility now. You don't understand, she said coldly. This isn't a swarm. It isn't some tyrant's conquest. She paused, then gestured toward the next display. The light shifted, revealing. A grainy relay flickered to life, fragments of a human transmission, one of the few scraps of intel scraped from the void. It had been pulled from a Terran vessel in deep orbit. The voice that echoed through the chamber was calm, measured like a blade unsheathed. We do not crave war, but we will not be erased. The image cut, shifting again. This time, the feed showed a world recently seized from Varnak control. But what unfolded was not slaughter. It was far more unnerving. The Terrans were rebuilding. Foundries lit up across the surface, thunderous with life. Orbital batteries blinked back online. Defenses, once leveled, were rising stronger than before. Even the locals, subjugated survivors of the Varnak regime, remained untouched. Khalees stared in stunned silence. This isn't conquest, he whispered. Archon Zyral's voice finished the thought, low and cold. It's reclamation. This is the return of a sovereign force, one that never truly died. The realization settled on the tribunal like ash after fire. The Terrans had not come to punish. They had come to govern. Beyond the Conclave's reach, aboard the Vigil's end, Admiral Kale Wren studied the world beneath, a former Varnak bastion, now under Terran control. His crew moved with quiet precision, their faces carved with the weight of something greater than any campaign. This was more than a war. It was heritage. The galaxy had buried humanity, deleted their legacy, and rewritten the stars without them. That erasure would not be allowed to stand. A soft chime snapped Wren from thought. The incoming feed bore the Conclave seal, marked urgent. A request. A plea. Peace negotiations. Wren inhaled through his nose, a dry smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. They finally understand, he murmured. Commander Thorne arched a brow. So do we parley? The Admiral turned toward the officers gathered behind him, voice ironclad. Not yet. His eyes locked onto the stars beyond, where the Terran fleet hung like sentinels, silent, armed, waiting. First, he said, we make sure they remember. The Conclave's entreaty for peace echoed into the void, unanswered. Days passed, then weeks. But the Terrans made no move. They did not breach Conclave borders. They sent no demands, no declarations. They simply advanced, one dominion after another, disassembling the Varnak hierarchy piece by piece. Not as an army, but as a storm. The Varnak, once the galaxy's predators, now fled like vermin before wildfire. It wasn't war. It was extinction. And the Conclave had no language for what they were witnessing. The conflicts of old had always unraveled slowly, fueled by the wars of the past, had been bloated with politics, uneasy treaties, desperate coalitions, and battles over minerals and pride. But the Terrans fought by another law. No drawn-out engagements, no compromises. Every strike was exact, every siege over before it began. They advanced like the void itself, relentless, unstoppable. Archon Zyral, sovereign speaker of the Conclave, felt the pull of history dragging at her chest as she scanned the latest strategic readouts. Varnak worlds lost, 42. Warships destroyed, 2,136. Terran fleet losses, negligible. And now, the most chilling entry yet, Carthage 6, the Varnak homeworld, was under full siege. The Terrans had done in mere weeks what the Conclave had failed to do in countless lifetimes. They are executing them, A Zerati broodlord hissed, his limbs twitching with visible discomfort. Every war chief, every command node, eliminated. No trials, no broadcast warnings. But Keldarin, the Eliari envoy, spoke softly. They spare the civilians. They do not plunder. They do not raise cities. The hall went still. The silence wasn't relief. It was dread. The Terrans weren't traditional conquerors. They were something colder, something that deletes. They must be stopped, snarled the general of the Threxan Guard. If they could do this to the Varnak, they could unmake any of us. Then perhaps, Zyril said at last, her voice slow, deliberate, we must stop seeing them as mere adversaries and begin to understand what they've become. Faces turned toward her, brows furrowed, mandibles twitching, unsure. She inhaled deeply, then chose, I will go to them myself. A wave of whispers swept the chamber. You'd walk into their shadow? The Zenthi speaker recoiled. To beings who've dismissed every envoy, ignored every plea, they are not monsters, Zyril replied. They are what survives when empires forget how to. If we don't learn why, then we will fall beside the Varnak. Aboard the Vigil's end, Admiral Kale Wren stood at the forward deck, hands behind his back, eyes locked on the final inferno. Below, Carthage 6 burned, its sky laced with smoke and fire. The Varnak had chosen death over surrender, and humanity had granted it. Now, with the last fortresses collapsing, a new signal crackled across the comms. Admiral, Thorne said, voice tight, eyes wide. Priority transmission incoming. Wren's brow narrowed. Another threat from the Varnak. Thorne shook his head slowly. No, sir. It's from the Conclave. And this time it's not a request. Wren turned to face him, expression unreadable. They're sending someone? The bridge fell into stillness. The Conclave had exhausted every channel. Now, they were gambling everything on this one act. Wren exhaled, the silence of the moment thick around him. Finally, he nodded once. Let them approach, he said, and turned back to the stars. The scorched world beneath them still smoked, but the galaxy awaiting them above was no longer the one they had left behind. The envoy of the Conclave arrived under layers of protection, a single, sleek vessel bearing the crest of galactic unity, slipping from hyperspace into the looming presence of the Terran formation. It was a diplomatic craft, streamlined, graceful, built not for battle, but for negotiation. And yet it floated like prey beneath the shadow of Titans. The Vigil's End and her sister ships towered in silence, steel giants forged for war. Inside the envoy's chamber, Archon Zyril sat motionless in her seat, fingers curled white against the chair's arms. They'd called her mad, reckless. No alien had stood before a Terran in living memory, not in parley, not in surrender. Yet here she was. But no weapons greeted them, no barrage. Instead, a single message cut through the static, docking granted. Proceed. The voice was glacial, controlled. The voice of a soldier, not a diplomat. Her second, Rilan, a pale-skinned Eliari with luminous eyes, shifted beside her, whispering, this could be a trap. If they wanted us dead, Zyril replied, we'd already be wreckage. The docking was near flawless, too flawless. Their vessel clamped into place with clinical precision. A hiss. Decompression. The hatch opened, and the Terrans stepped through. A squad in charcoal armor moved with exactitude, faces hidden behind obsidian helmets, weapons holstered but ready. Zyril felt the atmosphere change. These were not guards. They were executioners on standby. And in their center stood the man she'd only known from dossiers, Admiral Kale Wren. His presence was gravitational, unspoken pressure that bent the very air around him. No medals adorned his chest, no displays of power or ceremony, only a single symbol etched in silver, the sigil of a united Terran accord. His eyes found hers, piercing, unreadable. Then he spoke. You asked for this. His tone was hollow of warmth, not hostile, not kind, simply unyielding. Xyril inhaled once, sharply, then stepped forward. I am Archon Xyril of the Conclave. Ren's face remained still. I know. Her throat tensed. Diplomacy had always been an art, charm, influence, strategic pleasantries. But here, none of that would matter. She gathered herself. Then you know why I've come. Ren studied her a moment longer, then turned with sharp precision. Walk with me. She hesitated, just long enough to feel it, then followed. As they moved through the vigils and stark corridors, Xyril tried to make sense of what she saw. Everything around her was built for function, cold, efficient, precise. There was no artistry here, no ornamentation. These were not vessels of comfort. They were engines of destruction. You never answered our earlier transmissions, Xyril ventured, voice guarded. There was nothing worth answering, Ren replied, eyes fixed ahead. You were occupied then, she pressed. Occupied with genocide. That made him pause. He turned, slow and deliberate, fixing her in place with that glacial stare. They were already finished, he said flatly. They just didn't realize it. The breath caught in her throat. There was no pride in his words, no venom, just certainty, final and absolute. She steadied herself. And what comes after the Varnak are gone? Ren resumed his pace, footsteps echoing. That depends. He stopped again, this time turning to face her fully. His gaze cut through her like frost. On whether the rest of you repeat their mistakes. The message was unspoken but deafening. The Varnak had tried to challenge the Terrans, and for that they'd been erased. The Conclave had always viewed itself as above such barbarity, elevated beyond the savagery of conquest. But now, as Xyril stared into the eyes of the man leading this ancient resurgence, she understood. This wasn't a realm built on treaties or compromise. This was vengeance, sharpened into doctrine, and the stars had every right to tremble. She had sat across from despots, emperors, warlords of every shape, but never from someone like Kael Ren. The Terrans were unlike any force she had encountered, not only because of their machines, not just for their precision, but for the way they existed. Every step was chosen, every movement disciplined. They walked like shadows returned to claim justice from a living. Ren led her into a chamber dim and stripped of comfort. No banners, no fanfare, only a single table at the center, flanked by plain chairs. Walls shimmered with tactical feeds, showing the Varnak military disintegrating system by system. Once titanic, now crumbling. Sit, Ren said simply, gesturing. She hesitated, then lowered herself into place. He remained standing. You came to speak, he said. So speak. Xyril drew a breath. The Conclave seeks to open dialogue with the Terran Accord. For what? His voice held no inflection. You weren't interested in dialogue when you wrote us out of existence. She stiffened. For generations, the Conclave had spoken of Terrans as myth, a cautionary tale for novice envoys. Never provoke a war you can't win, they'd warn, or you'll share the human's fate. And now the ghosts had come home. To be clear, she said carefully, we didn't erase you out of spite. You vanished. No ruins, no beacons, nothing left behind. We believed you lost. You believed wrong, Ren answered. His voice cut through her words like steel. We were never gone. His gaze burned cold. We were watching. A chill danced down her spine. Xyril gathered herself, straightening. If that's true, then you know the Conclave isn't your enemy. The Varnak were a threat to everyone. They enslaved, ravaged, and destroyed without restraint. And you let them, Ren replied. She had no defense, no words. Finally, he sat, placing his hands flat against the table's cold surface. Tell me, Archon, why are you really here? Xyril drew a breath, slow and steady. Because the conclave fears what comes after the Varnak fall. The silence lingered, long and heavy. Clever, Ren muttered at last. For once. He leaned back only slightly. So let's discuss truth. Your conclave doesn't want peace. It wants a leash to bind us, to keep us from becoming what we were always meant to be. And what is that? She asked. He met her eyes. To reclaim what was taken. A cold knot formed in her chest. You believe the galaxy belongs to you? His lips lifted, barely. No. But I remember what was stolen. And we won't lose it again. Zyral's hands clenched beneath the table. She had come hoping for reason, for diplomacy. Instead, she had found something far more dangerous than war. A species with a grudge vast enough to fracture the stars. If humanity had truly returned, then conflict was no longer a possibility. It was prophecy, and the conclave was unprepared. The silence between them pressed like gravity. Never in her long career had she felt so powerless. She had faced kings driven by pride, guilds blinded by greed, regimes desperate for survival. And she had turned every weakness into leverage. But the Terrans needed nothing. No fuel, no favors, no alliances. They had come armed, fed, and focused. A storm with a purpose. And that made them the deadliest force she had ever encountered. Ren watched her unmoved. No emotion stirred in his glacial eyes. The Terrans were not fueled by vengeance alone. They were patient. They had waited in the dark for their moment. Zyral steadied her breath. Then tell me plainly, what is it humanity wants? Ren exhaled, long and slow, as if deciding whether she even deserved the answer. We want justice. Her heart jolted. Justice. The most dangerous word in any language. She leaned in, cautious. The Varnak are all but finished. Their empire lies in ruins. Their fleets turned to scrap. You've taken their homeworld. If this is about justice, then it should be over. Ren tilted his head slightly, the faintest shadow of a smirk on his lips. You think it ends with the Varnak? Her blood turned to ice. He continued, voice low and final. They were just the beginning. The ones who struck first were fools, Ren said, his tone darkening. But the rest of you, the ones who watched, who let it happen. He leaned in slightly. You're next. Zyral's breath hitched, caught on the weight of his words. Humanity was betrayed. Ren continued, voice level but glacial. We had allies. We had friends. We built a civilization that touched the edge of the void. And when war found us, when we cried out, the conclave turned away. Zyral's mind spun. She had studied the ancient fragments, the broken records, and conflicting legends. Some claimed the Terrans had annihilated themselves. Others said their world was swallowed by cataclysm. But none had ever mentioned an alliance, a betrayal. Ren pressed on, his voice heavy with centuries of silence. When the storm came, we sent our pleas across every channel. We asked for help, and we stood alone. We bled alone. We died alone. Zyral forced herself to breathe. That was lifetimes ago. Ren's expression remained carved from ice. And yet here we are. The meaning was unmistakable. Terrans do not forget. And suddenly she saw it. This wasn't just about justice. This was about punishment. Retribution. Ren didn't correct her when she whispered, "You don't want peace. You want to remind us." Instead, he said simply, "We will ensure no species ever forgets humanity again." Silence fell, dense and absolute. Zyral had come seeking understanding. She had hoped to negotiate. But now the veil had lifted. This was not about past wounds. It wasn't even about war. This was reclamation. And the conclave had two paths, bend or be broken. She barely found her voice. What happens now? Ren rose without haste. His eyes drifted to the tactical feed. Human fleets already on the move, spreading outward into untouched sectors. Now, he said quietly, you decide if you'll survive the new order or become just another monument to what stood in our way. For the first time in her life, Xyril felt true fear. She had been called a master diplomat. She had bent empires to her will with words. But now she stood before something immune to negotiation. Ren and his people sought no seats, no favors, no acknowledgement. They had come not to ask, but to take. His words rang with such finality it sent a tremor down her spine. You misunderstand, Admiral, she said carefully, every word a scalpel. This council is not the one that failed you. We are willing to own the sins of the past, to forge a new path with your kind. Ren exhaled sharply, almost a faint, almost amused breath escaped him. A relationship like the one you had with the Varnak. Her breath froze. He knew. He knew what the records had buried, what the council dared not admit. They had let the Varnak spread unchecked, their war machine grinding across frontier worlds, enslaving the weak while the council looked away. Only when the fire grew too big to contain had they intervened. Xyril had always assumed no one would challenge the Conclave's quiet duplicity. But the Terrans, they remembered. Your council doesn't serve justice, Ren said, his voice not angry, not performative, just resolute. You tolerated the Varnak because they were useful. You erased us because it was easier than admitting you failed. Xyril's jaw tightened, a losing battle to keep her control intact. That doesn't mean war is our only future. Ren watched her for a long time, saying nothing. Then he turned, fingers brushing the console. The projection shifted. A galactic chart unfolded in soft blue and red hues. Entire sectors, once ruled by the Varnak, now marked as fallen. But more troubling, the human fleets, growing, moving into zones long thought unreachable, like roots reclaiming buried soil. Tell me, Archon, Ren said without turning. Do you know what happened to Terra? Xyril paused. No, Ren's head turned slowly, his face unreadable. Neither do we. Those 4 words chilled her more than any threat. Our cradle world vanished, he said, low and cold. Not destroyed, not glassed, just gone. Xyril's thoughts spiraled. It was impossible. A planet like Terra couldn't simply disappear. It was the origin, the heartbeat. And yet, Ren leaned in, his voice now a knife's whisper. For generations, we searched. We sifted through ruins, through shattered colonies and silenced archives. Every trail went dark. Every clue ended in ash. Terra had been removed. The silence that followed was razor-thin. And then he said the words that shattered her. We believed the Conclave had a hand in it. Her breath caught. No, that's not. We wouldn't. You don't even know your own past, he cut in. But we do. His eyes locked on hers. We found what you hid. Archives buried in the dust. Coordinates erased from every system. Someone made sure we'd never go home. Xyril felt the walls shift around her. This wasn't a war for territory. This was a reckoning. And the Terrans weren't just reclaiming their legacy. They were chasing the truth. And once they caught it, nothing in the stars would be safe. She drew in a breath, fragile, uncertain. If the Conclave played a role in Terra's disappearance, I swear, I will find out. Ren's gaze narrowed, unreadable, and for a long, long moment, he said nothing. And for the first time, he smiled. It was not warm. It was not kind. It was the smile of someone who already knew how the story ends. You'll try, Ren said. Then he rose and nodded toward the hatch. This conversation is over. Return to your conclave. Tell them what we've told every other empire that dared to stand in our path. Xyril swallowed, throat dry. And what exactly is that? Ren's features hardened like stone. Humanity has returned, and we're not asking. She departed the oblivion's edge with a weight pressing against her very bones. Every step onto her diplomatic cruiser felt heavier. Her crew watched her in silence, their eyes pleading for reassurance, for something they could hold on to. She had nothing to give them. Archon, Rilan approached, her second in command, his voice uncertain. What did they say? Xyril collapsed into her seat, fingers pressing against her temples. Everything we feared, and worse. She had gone there to avert war, to find compromise. But compromise had never been on the table. The Terrans didn't seek alliances. They weren't here to repair the balance. They wanted justice. They wanted retribution. And more terrifying than all, they wanted the truth. She turned to Rilan. Signal the High Conclave. Emergency assembly immediately. When her image flickered into the central hollow dais, the chamber was already erupting. Did they agree to halt their expansion? Are they willing to enter dialogue? Will they accept a ceasefire? Xyril's fists clenched at her sides. No, she said. The Terrans didn't come to negotiate. The room fractured into chaos. Some delegates still clung to denial, believing this was simply posturing, that the humans could be bargained with or intimidated. They were wrong. The Varnak are finished, she continued. Their domain is ash. Their fleets shattered beyond repair. Whatever remnants remain will be swept away in days. A Zari matriarch clicked her mandibles nervously, and after that, Xyril exhaled slowly. Then they come for us. Silence. It was immediate and suffocating. Impossible, growled a warlord of the Zirin Kal. We did nothing to them. Xyril's gaze locked onto his. Did you oppose the Varnak as they spread their fires? He said nothing. Did you lift a single blade to stop the enslavement, the razing? Still silence. Did any of us? The truth hung in the air like poison. You don't understand, Xyril said, her voice hollow. They believe we let them burn. They think we buried their name. And now they are sweeping through this galaxy like a storm that refuses to be forgotten, because they will not let it happen again. An Alari envoy, young, uncertain, finally asked, if they cannot be reasoned with, what choice do we have? War, the Zari matriarch is horrified. You saw what they did to the Varnak, the Zari general spat. No one on this council, no empire, has the firepower to match them. A clawed fist slammed the council table. Then we unite. A coalition strike, combined fleets. Could what? Xyril snapped. Buy us time? Slow the tide. She leaned in, her silver eyes like burning stars. The Terrans don't wage war for resources. They don't seize land. They don't bargain or bluff. She let the silence stretch, let the truth settle like a knife. They fight to end things. And they don't stop until nothing's left but ash. The chamber fell quiet. At last, the truth was unavoidable. This wasn't politics. This wasn't some border skirmish. This was extinction or submission. Aboard the Oblivion's edge, far from the council's unraveling, Admiral Ren Varos stood at the helm, watching the stars drift beyond the viewport. How did she take it? Captain Sora Vasquez asked beside him. A faint smirk tugged at his lips. Exactly as predicted. He turned to the strategic holomap, where red blotches marked the crumbling remnants of the Varnak. But his eyes were already elsewhere. That was only the opening move, he muttered. The next targets are ripe, divided, nervous, unready. He zoomed the map. Allied clusters fractured. Fleets too scattered. They won't know how to fight what's coming. They'll learn, Vasquez said, exhaling. Too late for them, Ren replied. He watched as the next wave of human vessels aligned for jump. Hundreds of warships shimmering with charged energy. They would plunge deeper into conclave space within moments. Let them panic, Ren thought. Let them cling to pacts and false hope. It wouldn't change the outcome. Humanity had returned. And this time, they weren't here to ask. They were here to take. Across the galaxy, the conclave was fracturing. In the wake of Archon Xyril's return, fear bloomed like wildfire. Once mighty empires, built on centuries of dominion, now trembled beneath a truth they had never imagined. The Terrans weren't a myth. They weren't defeated. They were winning. The Varnak were no more, wiped from the stars with horrifying precision. Karvas, their throne world, scorched from orbit. Their warlords tried and executed. Their fleets eradicated without a trace. Not even the Zari swarm, known for their brutality, had ever annihilated a species with such cold, clinical perfection. And now the Terrans advanced, one fleet after another, each entering deeper into conclave territory. They didn't raze cities. They didn't enslave civilians. They weren't looting. No, they were doing something far more unsettling. They were rewriting the very order of the stars. Xyril stood in the heart of the Grand Assembly, watching it all fall apart. Half our delegates are preparing surrender, a Zari general hissed in rage. They're abandoning outposts, evacuating whole systems. And the humans? Another counselor asked. They're absorbing the abandoned worlds, Xyril whispered. Not even resistance, growled the Ziran admiral, his scaled face taut with unease. No blockades, no atrocities, just quiet submission. Xyril's hands trembled. They're not destroying civilizations. They're recruiting them. The Terrans weren't toppling planets in flames. They were building something massive. Already, dozens of worlds had voluntarily joined the United Terran Accord. Why? Because while the Conclave hesitated, humanity acted. The Varnak had burned half the quadrant, and the Council had done nothing. Terrans had erased them in 4 weeks. For many across the stars, that was all the proof they needed. A new power was rising, not forged in diplomacy or doctrine, but in fury, in justice, in the sacred promise that never again would the defenseless suffer. And people, whole species, were choosing to side with humanity. Aboard the Oblivion's Edge, Admiral Ren Varos stood at the command platform, watching as yet another system dropped its planetary shields. On the holoscreen, an anxious Ilari governor appeared. His voice trembled. We surrender. Our citizens will not resist. Varos nodded once. Then they won't have to. With a simple motion, the Terran fleet descended, but not with soldiers brandishing rifles. Not with fire. They landed with relief teams, with medical units, with engineers. One more world added. One more system taken, without firing a single shot. Beside him, Vasquez let out a low breath. They're folding faster than Intel predicted. They were never loyal to the Conclave, Varos said quietly. They obeyed out of fear. Vasquez smirked. And now they're afraid of us? Varos shook his head. No. Now they believe in us. That was the divide. The Conclave ruled with red tape and illusion. They governed by stalling, promising peace they never delivered. But humanity? They acted. They didn't parley with tyrants. They ended them. And the galaxy was beginning to understand. Maybe Terrans weren't the threat. Maybe they were the cure. Within the fractured conclave, Xyril listened as panic spread across the chamber like wildfire. Their influence is spreading too fast, one delegate shouted. They've annexed 5 independent sectors, without conflict. This isn't a war, another snapped. It's conversion. Xyril's pulse pounded like war drums. The old order was crumbling. The conclave's grip was slipping. And she knew with terrible clarity, that no one wanted to admit the truth. There was no stopping the Terran resurgence. There were only 2 paths now, stand against them and be shattered, or kneel and survive. She closed her eyes. In that moment, she chose. And when she spoke, her voice was soft, but unshakable. We must begin true negotiations with the Terrans, not as rulers of the stars, but as survivors seeking a place within their new design. The chamber exploded in outrage. But in the deepest parts of every leader's soul, they all knew the truth. This wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. And it had ended before it ever truly began. Humanity had already won. The conclave shattered under its own panic. Empires that had stood tall for millennia crumbled like ancient statues in a rising tide. Some launched desperate fleets into hopeless skirmishes and only hastened their own extinction. Others capitulated in silence, their rulers slipping into exile as their systems vanished into the growing reach of the Terran Accord. And then there were a few, like High Speaker Exiled, who made a different choice. She now stood on the command deck of the Oblivion's Edge, the flagship of Earth's Second Fleet, staring out into the endless dark. Beyond the viewport, a phalanx of human warships drifted silently, lined like blades against the void. Beside her, Admiral Ren Varos said nothing, a presence of stone and steel. Xyril had resisted this end with every ounce of will, had clung to the belief that treaties could stop the storm, that diplomacy still had weight. But the humans had never returned for words. They had come to reclaim what was taken. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "Why did you spare me?" Varos exhaled, his gaze never leaving the stars. "Because we're not here to build a graveyard," he said. "We're here to build what comes next." She turned toward him, searching his face for cruelty, for vengeance, for lies. But there was none. Humanity could have scorched every world that abandoned them, could have ground the galaxy to ash in their fury. But instead they had chosen a path more terrifying. They had changed everything. Where once the stars were ruled by deceit and bureaucracy, now stood something raw and real. An empire not born of convenience, but of survival. An empire forged in silence and scars, hidden in exile, waiting for the moment to rise again. And now that moment had come. Xyril drew in a slow, steadying breath. "What happens next?" she asked. Only then did Varos finally turn to her, his expression a mystery carved in stone. "Now," he said, "now we build." The age of the conclave was dead, and in its place a new order had risen. The era of humanity had begun, and the stars would never be the same again. Humanity didn't ask for war. They asked to be remembered. Now the stars belong to them, and the galaxy will never forget again. If you want to see what happens next, subscribe and join us as the legend unfolds. They thought the void was the enemy, but when humanity connected to its mind, they saw the truth. The real threat was still coming, and the only thing standing between extinction and survival was the one species ruthless enough to fight fear with fire. Before we dive into this intense sci-fi journey, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens when humanity becomes the galaxy's last, best hope, and its greatest threat. The chamber pulsed with silence, broken only by the distant thrum of the dreadnought's core drives. High Marshal Kalen scanned the solemn faces encircling the obsidian table. Dread lingered in every gaze. He, an Oryxian elder who had weathered 3 centuries of galactic storms, had never seen such raw despair. "The Umbra has claimed the Velkar Reach," he murmured, his voice worn thin. "That marks 32 fallen sectors in just 2 solar cycles." The central hollow display flickered, revealing a star map bathed in crimson. Too much red, not nearly enough azure. Those red territories gone, swallowed whole by the Umbra swarm. "Our last incursion cost 5 dreadships," said Warlord Strax, a towering meridian plated in silvered carapace. "Not a single enemy casualty. They mutate too fast. We've lost the element of surprise." The Aeon Accord had once stood tall, 17 races united in harmony. Together, they had sculpted wonders across the stars, crystalline metropolises that shimmered in starlight, symphonies that stirred the soul, cures that had halted extinction. But none of it had prepared them for annihilation. "Every predictive array gives us 12 weeks, whispered Velan, the moss-skinned Solari tactician who commanded their probability nexus. "We've simulated every variable. We fall in all of them." Marshal Davao gazed down at his gnarled palms, forefingers aged and pale, marked by years of quiet service. He had hoped to fade gently, not burn out beneath a blackened sky. "We may need to contemplate conditional surrender," offered Emissary Jern, his singular eye stalk quivering. "Surrender." Strax let out a bitter rasp that barely resembled a laugh. "The Umbra doesn't negotiate. It devours." The Umbra wasn't a civilization. It was a singular will, splintered across billions of hosts. It didn't conquer, it consumed. Worlds, oceans, suns. It left only silence. "Then let us fall with flame," said Valkyr Tysa of the Battleborn's wrath. Even her voice trembled. The door hissed open. A junior comms tech burst in, breathless, uniform creased, eyes wild. "Hi, Marshal. We've just received an open band transmission. Unknown vessel breaching outer sectors. Umbra scouts." Kalen tensed. "No, sir. They claim they're from a planet called Solara. We don't have it on any star charts." Silence again. "They're broadcasting wideband. Monitoring our war, they say. And they say they wish to stand with us." "With us?" Strax growled. What could some forgotten world possibly offer now? He swallowed hard. "They say they're warriors, sir. All of them. They claim their entire legacy is forged in battle. While we cultivated peace," he added, voice barely a whisper. Once again, silence gripped the chamber. High Marshal Kalen felt something stir, not hope, not quite, but something close. A spark of intrigue. "Put them through," he commanded. "Let's hear these humans." The star map dissolved. In its place, a face blinked into view, flesh-toned, crowned with hair, and forward-set eyes that didn't blink enough. The creature wore strange battle garb, symbols stitched across the chest. "This is Commander Hallen Reeve of Solara," the voice declared, calm and clipped. "We hear you have a war that needs winning." For the first time in months, Kalen felt both his hearts beat just a little harder. Their ship arrived, an ungainly relic compared to the Confederation's elegant crafts. Its hull bore scorches and dents, a vessel forged in fire and pieced back together too many times. Commander Reeve entered the hall of accord with 4 others. Their uniforms were plain, marked by color bands. No weapons, yet everything in their posture screamed readiness. Not soldiers, hunters. The chamber stared. "You're smaller than I imagined," Kalen said. Reeve gave a brief smile, but her eyes held the cold of deep space. "Mass doesn't win wars, Marshal. Why help us?" Warlord Strax asked bluntly. "What do you want in return?" "Allies," Reeve answered. "Earth Solara is one world. We've only just begun reaching the stars. And in the vast unknown, we'd rather have friends and targets." Emissary Jern's eye stalks twitched. "And you truly believe you can outmatch what we've failed to stop?" "Our edge isn't tech," said another human, tall and dark-eyed. "Your tech isn't the problem. It's your thinking." "Major de Cruz," Reeve introduced, "my second." He nodded. "You wage war like scholars, precise, calculated. But war isn't a puzzle. It's blood, chaos." "And how do you fight?" asked Valkyr Tysa. Reeve's voice turned sharp. "Like beasts. Like survivors. We lie. We trap. We endure. You've faced the Umbra 2 cycles," she added. "We've faced each other for 2 millennia. While you perfected peace, we perfected war." "Prove it," barked Strax. Kalen raised a hand. "The trial decks. We'll run a live sim." An hour later, the chamber watched as 5 humans strode into the training dome. Across from them stood simulations of their greatest champions and the Void Spawn. The humans fought like nothing the Accord had ever witnessed. There was no symmetry, no discernible logic. One feigned collapse, dragging enemies into range before springing the trap. Another triggered a bulkhead to fall, crushing hostiles beneath twisted alloy. They spoke in flickers, nods, glances, subtle hand signals, and moved as a swarm with a single will. Yet each bore their own rhythm of violence. What stunned most was their speed. Their forms appeared average, flesh, bone, limited musculature, but they moved like lightning. Only later would analysts discover the source, an ancient chemical rush they called adrenaline, flooding them with unnatural speed in the face of threat. When the simulation ended, every opponent lay shattered. The humans bled, bruised, but still stood. "How do you move like that?" asked Velan, the Solari tactician, eyes wide. "Your tissue shouldn't permit that velocity." Major de Cruz flashed teeth in a half-smile. "When we're scared or furious, we evolve in real time. Biology's weapon." "You abandoned the warrior's code," Commander Tysa muttered. "We fight to survive," Commander Reeve replied, flatly. "The Umbra doesn't honor rules. Neither does extinction." Marshal Kalen rose slowly. Something long dead stirred in his chest. Was it hope? "The Council will decide," he said. "Do we accept Solaran support?" The vote was swift and unanimous. The war was lost already. If these brutal offworlders offered even a sliver of a chance, it was worth the risk. As Reeve departed, Kalen wondered, had they just allied with a more cunning predator? "This isn't war," bellowed Warlord Strax, slamming a plated fist into the steel console. "This violates every accord, every protocol." Major de Cruz didn't flinch. "That's why it'll work. The Umbra knows your doctrine. It's memorized your ethics." 3 days later, aboard Bastion Spire, the Confederation's last functioning orbital foundry, the war room glowed with tense energy. Captain Reeve now commanded the battlefront, despite howls of protest from alien officers. The hologrid displayed their plan, nothing like a core tradition. "You intend to use transport skiffs?" "Civilian vessels." Marshal Kalen asked aghast. "They're unarmed, undefended." "Exactly," said Reeve. "The Umbra won't see them as a threat. We'll conceal elite fighters within. Once they close," she mimed a burst with her hands. Commander Tysa studied the layout. Where others saw chaos, she saw opportunity. "You're abandoning the outer ring," she said. "That's where our strongest platforms sit. And that's why they'll die first," Cruz replied. "The Umbra will focus there. Meanwhile, we strike where they're blind." A tall, blue-plumed ambassador stepped forward, tall, a diplomat. "This is savagery," he muttered. "You're laying traps, faking retreats, using innocence as no civilians will be placed in danger," Reeve said, voice steely. "But the Umbra must believe they will. That's the trap." "Deception lacks dignity," Tal insisted, feathers bristling. Reeve let out a dry laugh, no warmth behind it. "We're not here to preserve dignity. We're here to survive." Marshal Kalen studied them. These creatures of flesh and fragile form. No scales, no armor, no claws. Yet something primal coiled beneath the surface. It was the eyes, he decided. They were the eyes of predators. "Your doctrine failed," said de Cruz to the room. "For 2 cycles, you've lost ground. You fight like architects, solving puzzles. We fight like stalkers, tracking prey." No one spoke. Even Warlord Strax fell into silence. Truth echoed louder than protest. "Tell me this," Kalen finally asked. "Suppose we follow your strategy and win. Then what?" "The Umbra is endless. You can't deceive them forever." "You're right," Reeve replied. "That's why this is just the opening strike." Her gaze sharpened. "Reinforcements are en route. Over 3,000 of our elite infantry. We've also requested specialized operatives from Solara. Only 3,000. Velan, the tactician, blinked rapidly. "They have millions." "Precision over volume," de Cruz answered, his grin faint. "One of our specialists is worth 100 line soldiers." "What sets them apart?" Valkyr Tysa asked, her curiosity sincere. Reeve and Cruz shared a glance, wordless, heavy. "They learn to think like the adversary," Reeve said at last. "To enter its logic. To uncover flaws no one else would even imagine." A shiver moved through the chamber. To think like the Umbra, none of them could fathom it. Reeve turned to Marshal Kalen. "Do we have clearance to proceed?" Kalen studied the tactical array once more. The human gambit was everything the Accord rejected. Misleading, unorthodox, reckless. It was also their last, desperate hope. "Permission granted," he said quietly. "May the cosmos have mercy on us all." "They're inbound," Villain called out, hands dancing across the holocontrols. Umbra vessels, multiple signatures. Far more than we projected. Kalen's voice dropped. "They've come for the foundry. They know Bastion Spire is our last forge. They mean to finish this, today." In the command nexus, Reeve stood motionless, her face unreadable. "Good," she said softly. "Let them try." All eyes turned toward her. Even now, after days among them, the aliens could not understand how these strange Terrans met death not with fear, but with fire. "Activate the defense grid," Reeve commanded. "Begin." "Initiate evacuation visuals," Reeve commanded. "Make it obvious. Let the Umbra see us crumble." "Our people are afraid," Valkyr said quietly. "Then they'll be very convincing," De Cruz replied with a grim smirk. The ruse began. Shuttlecraft peeled away from Bastion Spire, broadcasting panic across open channels. The outer sentry array fired, but their volleys deliberately missed. To the Umbra, it looked like chaos, like weakness, like fear. "They're swallowing the bait," De Cruz muttered, eyes fixed on the holo display. Beyond the ring, nestled in the broken rocks of a Lorthan belt, Solaran gunships waited in silence. Smaller than the Accord's cruisers, but vicious. Their hulls bristled with unfamiliar tech, the kind the Confederation had never imagined using. "Phase 2, Reeve ordered." The hidden ships powered up, unleashing disruptive wave fields. Instantly, portions of the Umbra swarm went dark, cut off from their collective will. The hive fractured. Individual vessels began to drift, confused and disconnected. "Phase 3, Reeve said, voice unwavering. The refugee transports that had fled hours earlier now veered back toward the fray. From their bellies emerged concealed strike fighters, their energy readings masked until the last second. They hit the swarm from behind. Simultaneously, the asteroids exploded, mines planted deep within them detonating in sync. A toxic mist of ionized debris swallowed the battlefield, jamming sensors and severing vision. "They're blind. They're isolated," De Cruz snapped. "Now everything you've got." From behind Proxima's dark moon, the concealed Confederation armada surged forward. Their orders: disable, not destroy. Aim for the relay cores. Sever the mind. The tactical feed became a storm of flickers and chaos. Void vessels spun out of control, some turning on their own. Lasers lit the screen like fireworks. For the first time, the hive knew disorder. For the first time, it knew fear. "They are pulling back," Villain whispered in disbelief. "The Umbra are retreating." The command center erupted. Cheers, embraces, weeping. 2 years of despair cracking open like ice under fire. But Marshal Kalen did not celebrate. His eyes were fixed on Reeve and De Cruz, already discussing adjustments for the next strike. "You did it," he said softly. "You broke them." Reeve turned, her gaze cold and distant. "No, Marshal. We wounded them. We frightened them. That was only the opening." She pointed toward the flickering display. "The Umbras never faced an enemy that bites back. They're not ready for a war like this. And they haven't seen what we're truly capable of," added De Cruz. A chill crept up Kalen's spine. Even in victory, he feared what would come next, what these relentless humans might unleash upon the stars. It broke through the ashen clouds of Kalos, for sleek, massive, and unlike any human vessel the Confederation had seen before. Painted along its hull was a black insignia, a stylized skull framed by fractured wings. Colonel Marcus Varn stepped onto the alloyed landing platform where Commander Reeve and Marshal Kalen awaited. He was tall even by human standards, his head shaven, a jagged scar carved down one side of his face. 20 figures followed, soldiers in black combat armor, silent and sharp. "Welcome to Bastion Spire, Colonel," said Reeve, offering a crisp salute. Marshal Kalen observed them with wary curiosity. "These are the specialists you requested." "Yes, sir," Varn replied, his voice low and deliberate. "We're called the Phantoms, experts in cognitive disruption and war psychology." Kalen didn't quite grasp the term, but something in Varn's stare warned him not to press. 2 weeks had passed since the first real victory. Reinforcements from Solara had arrived steadily, and the tide of war had shifted. 3 sectors reclaimed, momentum returning. But the enemy, too, was shifting. In the strategy chamber, De Cruz gestured to the display. "The Umbra is adapting. They're spawning multiple command nexuses now, distributing their collective mind across many cores." "They're evolving," Varn murmured. "Then we need to strike deeper, not just with firepower, but with doubt." Marshal Kalen frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "The Umbra is one well fragmented across countless hosts. That's its strength, but also its flaw. When severed, fragments behave erratically, disoriented, wounded." "You want to use that disorientation as a weapon?" Kalen asked, uneasy. "Exactly," Varn said. "My unit will infiltrate, not to destroy, but to unsettle. We'll hit their relays in ways they can't anticipate, methods that fray the mind." And so the Phantoms disappeared into Umbra space, striking unseen, unraveling connections, sowing chaos where none had existed. Strange reports followed. Umbra vessels began drifting. Units halted mid-battle. Some turned on their own kind. Others simply shut down. The collective trembled. But the greatest revelation came from a sealed laboratory deep within Bastion Spire. Dr. Senecor, lead bioneurochemist, addressed the War Council. "We've developed a viral agent," she said. "It doesn't kill, but it isolates. It disconnects infected Umbra from the hive." Marshal Kalen stiffened. "You're fracturing them into individuals?" "Yes," Core confirmed. "And the psychological backlash across the swarm is catastrophic. It's like amputating pieces of their mind, without warning." "This wasn't cleared," Kalen said, turning sharply to Reeve. "There are limits, even in warfare." Reeve's expression was unflinching. "Not for us. Not when extinction is the alternative." The council watched in silence as footage played. Infected Umbra, hosts moving alone, erratic, confused. What had once been perfect unison was now unraveling. Once fearless, the Umbra now wandered in confusion. They had battled relentlessly for 2 cycles. Now they cowered, disoriented. Some tried to speak. Others curled into corners, trembling. "This is how we win," said Colonel Varn. "Fear. They've never felt it before. Now they'll drown in it." Marshal Kalen studied the human faces around him. Cold, unwavering. No regret. No hesitation. Just ruthless focus. And for the first time, he questioned if saving the Confederation from annihilation meant handing the galaxy to a different kind of terror. In the celestial conclave chamber, chaos erupted. Representatives of all 17 Accord species shouted across the marble floor, while Kalen pounded his staff for silence. "The Terrans have crossed a line," bellowed Envoy Tal. Feathers flared in fury. "They deployed autonomous hunter-killers in the Inara sector without consent. Civilian zones were compromised." Major De Cruz stood alone at the center, hands behind his back. Calm. Steady. The drones targeted Umbra infiltrators embedded within urban districts. "We prevented mass extinction." "At the cost of innocent lives," roared the Centauri delegate. 23 civilians are dead." "If we hadn't intervened," De Cruz replied evenly, "that entire world would be ash. The Umbra don't take prisoners." The shouting returned, louder this time. After 1 month of Terran involvement, the war had transformed. 7 systems reclaimed. Momentum surging. But at what moral cost? Captain Reeves stormed into the hall, dust-streaked and exhausted, fresh from the battlefront. "While you squabble," she said, voice cutting through the noise, "the Umbra are evolving again. They're adapting faster than before. If we don't escalate, we lose." "Escalate?" gasped Tal. "You've already abandoned every law of engagement we have." "Maybe that's why we're not extinct yet," Reeve fired back. A new voice broke the tension. Mara, a junior diplomat from the fringe world of Elanther. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should explore diplomacy. We've proven our strength. The Umbra might finally listen." The humans stared at her like she'd suggested cutting out their own hearts. "Negotiate," De Cruz scoffed. "With them? They aren't here to talk. They're here to devour. And the only language they understand is pain." The council fractured. Some stood with the Terrans, valuing results over rules. Others recoiled, desperate to reclaim the high ground of peace. Marshal Kalen watched the unraveling alliance with mounting dread. At the very moment they needed unity, it was slipping through their fingers. 3 days later, the fracture widened. Colonel Varn's Phantoms executed a high-risk infiltration, obliterating a major Umbra birthing spire, wiping out millions of unformed hosts. But the operation also damaged a relic site on Kalos Prime, a sacred monument revered for millennia. Outrage erupted, not against the Umbra, but against the humans. In his private chamber aboard Bastion Spire, Marshal Kalen reviewed a flood of reports, unrest growing louder across Accord territories. Across from him stood Commander Reeve, as defiant as ever. "You asked for warriors without mercy," she said. "This is what that looks like." "I asked for help," Kalen replied coldly. "Not for the unraveling of everything we stand for. Principles won't shield you from extinction." He exhaled through clenched teeth. "Perhaps not. But if we survive by becoming what we once feared, what's left to save?" Reeve didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, alone in the dim light of his quarters, Marshal Kalen made a choice. The Terrans would remain in command. They were turning the tide. But quietly, he issued a classified order. Initiate Protocol Ecliptic, an emergency plan should their allies ever become a greater threat than the enemy. Meanwhile, across the stars, the Umbra had gone silent. Then came whispers, fragments of intercepted code, distorted pulses of thought. The hive wasn't retreating. It was evolving. A message jolted Kalen from sleep. Emergency session. Breach in multiple sectors. When he reached the war room, Reeve was already there, face grim. Across the central display, 3 systems burned. Chaos erupting without a single fleet movement. "They're not invading with ships," she said. "They're sending infiltrators." "Impossible," barked Warlord Strax. "Umbra physiology can't be concealed." "Not anymore," De Cruz cut in, highlighting sensor scans. "They've developed mimetic cloaking, biological camouflage. They can mimic us now." The war had changed. No longer a matter of territory or fleets. This was an unseen infection spreading from within. Alarming reports followed. Governors issuing irrational orders. Generals refusing to engage. Some demanded sudden diplomacy with the hive. Others abandoned critical defense posts. "They're exploiting our weakness," Reeve said, voice taut. "They know our alliance is fractured. They're tearing it apart from inside." Kalen felt the blood drain from his face. "They're replacing our leadership." Within days, paranoia bloomed. Reeve demanded the council convene, warning of the invisible threat now among them. But many delegates dismissed her warnings. "Another Terran scare tactic," scoffed the envoy from Venari. "An excuse for more brutality. You're being manipulated." Reeve shouted, fists clenched. "Can't you see what they're doing to you?" Ambassador Tal rose smoothly, feathers preened and precise. "Perhaps," he said coolly, "it is time the Terrans return to their world. We are grateful for your assistance, but we can handle matters from here." Commander Reeves stared back at him, her eyes hard as obsidian. The Umbra had breached their walls. Now the enemy wore their faces. Reeve narrowed her eyes. There was something wrong about Envoy Tal. Too composed. Too precise. Not like the reactive, emotional Tal she remembered. She leaned close to Marshal Kalen. "That's not him," she whispered. "Tal's been replaced." Before Kalen could respond, sirens erupted throughout Bastion Spire. A massive Umbra assault had begun, targeting supply corridors and trade nexuses. Human units were isolated, starved of reinforcements, their flanks collapsing. Far beyond Kalos, Colonel Varn's phantoms uncovered the scope of the infiltration. Nearly one-third of the Accord's leadership had been replaced, perfect mimicry embedded deep in their command structure. But when Varn attempted to warn the Corps, he found every channel blocked, every transmission watched. "They've taken our comm grid," he told his team. "No one's clean. No one can be trusted." And so they pivoted from soldiers to executioners. Operating in silence, the Phantoms began eliminating high-ranking officials they believed compromised. No trials. No approvals. Just judgment and fire. When news of the assassinations reached Bastion Spire, the already cracked alliance shattered completely. Human forces were declared enemies of the Accord. Commander Reeve and her officers were arrested by internal security, stripped of rank and weapons. Her cells cold, empty, until Marshal Kalen appeared, slipping past surveillance. His face was gaunt, eyes shadowed with regret. "I believe you," he whispered, "but I may be the only one left who does." "The Council," she asked. "They've ordered full Terran withdrawal. You're to leave Accord space within 72 hours. Reeve looked him dead in the eye. "If we leave, you all die. The Umbras already won." Kayla nodded, slowly. "I know." He unlocked her restraints. "That's why I'm getting you out." Moving through the labyrinthine underlayers of the station, Reeve explained her desperate gambit. "The neurovirus we engineered, the one that severs the Umbra's links, I want to modify it. Inject myself." Kalen halted. "You die." "Maybe," Reeve admitted. "But if I survive, I'll see what they see, hear their thoughts, know their next move. And if you don't," she smiled grimly, "then one human dies trying to save trillions. Sounds like a good trade." In that moment, Kalen understood that Terran ruthlessness wasn't born of cruelty, but of cold, calculated sacrifice. In a concealed med lab beneath Bastion Spire, Commander Helena Reeve lay strapped to a surgical slab. Dr. Senakor prepared the viral compound while Kalen watched, pale and tense. "This is madness," he muttered. "No one's ever touched the hive and survived." Reeve's voice was calm. "Then it's time someone did." Dr. Kaur injected the serum. Reeve convulsed violently. Her eyes turned white. Her body seized. "Neural activity spiking," Kaur said. "She's in." Inside her mind, Reeve had entered the storm. Then something impossible happened. Inside her mind, Reeve didn't drown in the hive. She floated within it, billions of minds whispering at once, weaving a lattice of thought that stretched across stars. But she remained herself, a solitary flame within the storm. And what she saw shattered everything. The Umbra weren't consuming out of conquest or cruelty. They were running, fleeing from something far older, something monstrous, lurking at the edge of known space. It had pursued them across eons, devouring worlds and minds without form or mercy. The Umbra hadn't attacked because they wanted to. They were cornered, desperate. With trembling fingers, Reeve reached for the comms console beside her bed. Kalen helped steady her hand. "This is Commander Helena Reeve," she gasped, pale and shaking. "I'm inside the Umbra mind. You need to see what I've seen." With Dr. Senakor's neural interface, the experience was broadcast system-wide. In seconds, across every Accord colony and Terran vessel, beings of every species were linked, for a moment, to Reeve's vision. They saw memories encoded in Umbra thought, generations fleeing darkness, worlds lost, children silenced. For the first time, the Accord understood the fear, the need to survive. But something else happened too. The Umbra felt humanity. That fire, willpower sharpened by grief. The strength to act despite fear. To protect, to endure. The Umbra couldn't comprehend it. It overwhelmed their hive mind with raw, alien individuality. While the psychic shockwave rippled through the swarm, Colonel Varn's Phantoms coordinated with loyal Accord strike teams to launch precision raids, not to destroy, but to fracture. They deployed Dr. Core's refined virus at key nexus nodes. As the Umbra consciousness splintered, isolated clusters emerged, smaller, separate minds. And with individuality came something unthinkable: dialogue. At one remote outpost, Major de Cruz stood before a shimmering figure, the first Umbra entity to speak alone. "We don't have to be enemies," he said. "You don't have to run alone. We can face the darkness together." The war ended not with a weapon, but with something only Terrans could wield: ruthless compassion. Terran leaders established stringent safeguards for integrating the reformed Umbra into galactic civilization. Accord diplomats provided the empathy to guide reconciliation. 3 cycles later, Marshal Kalen stood beside Reeve, fully recovered, at an orbital construction ring. Below them, former enemies worked side by side, erecting defenses against the greater threat still looming beyond the galactic veil. "You came as invaders," Kalen said, "but you remained as saviors." Reeve watched the joint crews welding starside panels. "Everyone thinks our strength is how we fight," she said. "But really it's how we change, even when it hurts." Kalen nodded. "What makes your kind so relentless?" Reeve paused, thoughtful. "Because we remember what it feels like to be small, to be afraid. But we never let that fear stop us from living, from building, from reaching out." And then she smiled. "If that gave you chills, there's more where that came from. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe humanity's greatest weapon is the will to survive. And remember, this war is just beginning.